All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Mark Wilson here again at the Florida Chamber of Commerce in our Tallahassee headquarters. We are at day 102 into Florida's COVID environment, and we have a really, I think, important update today to share with our membership. Florida has moved into phase 2 of Governor DeSantis' relaunch efforts since we talked last. And I'm going to give you the best update that I can. And I have a very special guest with me again today. The Florida Chamber Foundation's chief economist, Dr. Jerry Parrish, has run all the numbers, and he's going to give you his perspective. And then, as we always do for our Florida Chamber members and our Florida Chamber Foundation trustees, we're going to dedicate some time in the meeting for a live Q&A. And so you can actually go ahead and start asking questions anytime. Just simply use the Q&A feature inside Zoom, and then I will moderate those questions later on in our program, and I'll take them in a first-come, first-served basis, and we'll talk about it more throughout that. Obviously, there's a lot of change going on right now all across the country in many ways, certainly even outside of COVID. What we've been trying to do over the last several months from a leadership standpoint at the Florida Chamber is we've been trying to gather as much information as we can from the White House, from Congress, from the regulatory agencies, and then, of course, working closely with the governor's office and many state agencies. And then we've been working closely with many of Florida's leading local chambers of commerce and economic development groups through a program we have called Relaunch Florida. And we've had hundreds of local chamber leaders on webinars every week with us for the last 12 weeks. And I couldn't be more pleased with the unity that exists from the business community from Pensacola to the Keys right now in terms of trying to stay aligned to what both Governor DeSantis is trying to do in terms of a safe reopening, as well as the guidelines from CDC, EPA, OSHA, the White House, and so forth. And so we're going to do the best we can in an ever-changing environment to give you information today that maybe you didn't have before. And I'm quite confident that you will give us information in the Q&A component, maybe that we didn't know. And as is the case every week, we'll find out answers to your questions. And if you ask a question anonymously, it's hard to get back to you on that, but we'll put all of the questions that we don't know the answers to out on the Florida Chamber's COVID Frequently Asked Questions website, and then we'll spend the weekend, if we have to, tracking down answers for you. So that's been a really good give and take for us, and we certainly look forward to doing that again today. So with that said, here is essentially what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover a lot, and I'll start out and I'll go through giving you an update. I want to give you feedback on what all of you told us as you were registering for today's webinar, and then I'll give a bit of a federal and state update, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Parrish to go through some of the numbers, and then we'll dig right into our Q&A portion. One thing that I thought it would be very healthy to sort of start off with is, you know, if you think about what it felt like, say, 75 days ago or 90 days ago, when we were just 1 or 2 weeks into this in Florida, as president of the Florida Chamber, I would regularly hear, you know, how long is this COVID thing going to be around? Is it a couple of weeks? Is it a couple of months? You know, can we get back to normal by summer? And you know, a lot has happened in the last 102 days, and we could spend years talking about each one of these points that I have on the screen right now, but I simply wanted to acknowledge that, you know, unprecedented is a word that's been used a lot lately, but this environment for change that's going on in Florida right now truly is unprecedented, and I just simply wanted to acknowledge that there are 4 sort of parts of an opportunity to make real change, both in terms of reimagining what the future of Florida can look like, and also really taking advantage of sort of a moment in time to unify the business community together. Obviously, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. It's not the first one the world's seen. It's not the last one. but it's ongoing, and we really don't know the outcome of it. Also, the whole world is talking about really having an overdue conversation and a focus on the equality of opportunity and social justice. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that from the Florida Chamber and the Florida Chamber Foundation in the coming weeks. Be thinking about our Florida Prosperity Initiative there and all we can do to unify business together for real change and real leadership. And then also, we're not only in a pandemic, we're also in a global recession. And the truth is, we don't know how long it's going to last. And then finally, Florida is obviously the most important state in the nation when it comes to the future of the free world and an election that we have this year relative to a presidential election. The sort of breaking news in the last 48 hours is it now appears that the Republican National Convention is going to be in Jacksonville. So congratulations to our good friends, Mayor Lenny Curry and Daniel Davis at the Jacksonville Chamber, and to the business community there. This is something that, the world has been talking about Florida for a long time, and obviously this will put Florida in the news, as would the Democratic National Convention being in Florida. So those are four big things going on that we're paying a lot of attention to and providing a lot of leadership within. I always start all of our webinars off with an updated global picture at what's going on. Now, I have to confess, this is about an hour old, so it's changed since then. But what I wanted to show you here is, this graph is still going up at a pretty good clip on a global basis. We've had almost 425,000 deaths worldwide. The United States clearly leads the pack and continues to grow. What I wanted to show you here, though, is as president of the Florida Chamber, I'm asked all the time, when are things going to get back to normal? And Florida is one of those states, right? If we were a country, we would be the 17th largest economy in the world. And we rely heavily on visitors, on international travelers, if you will, to come to Florida, both on vacations and on business. And what I want you to look at there is the Brazil number. It's over 800,000 now. And to put that in perspective, if Florida has about 14 million visitors to Florida every year that come from another country, and about 8% or about 1.2 million of our visitors every year come from Brazil. So, when we have other partners like the United Kingdom and Brazil that are in trouble and have numbers growing, I think that that tells us a lot in terms of how long it might be before we start seeing a significant flow of international travel. So that's something that we have to pay a lot of attention to. We've had over 25 webinars in the last few months. We've had over 11,000 business leaders participate, and I think you all are probably growing weary of seeing this slide. But I think what's important here on this slide is even countries like South Korea that thought they had this taken care of, or small nations like Singapore with a population of 6 million, they thought they had this COVID scenario taken care of. They started going back to school, they started going back to work, they started traveling again, and what happened was it came back again in a second wave, and so many of these nations that thought they had it under control have actually closed schools, closed businesses, closed all travel, and some nations have even closed all gatherings of non-family members. And so we don't know what the future of this looks like, but we do know until there's a vaccine for this, this is something that we've really got to manage as the virus that it is. So in terms of saving the date, we couldn't be more excited about the next webinar, and I hope you'll gather your entire leadership team and even your board around the table for this one, virtually speaking, obviously. We have, in a couple of weeks on the 25th, Dr. Parrish and I are going to be joined by the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. He's in very high demand. A lot of people want to know what the Federal Reserve is thinking. Dr. Parrish will talk a little bit about what he's hearing in a little while, but Dr. Raphael Bostic is a good friend of our initiatives, and we're looking very forward to June 25th at 11 a.m. Eastern When we send you today's follow-up, we'll include today's presentation in the follow-up, and we'll also include a link for you, your office, your team, your board, to go ahead and register for that webinar with Dr. Bostic. Very much looking forward to that. And also, as we work on the Florida Prosperity Initiative, which is economic opportunity for all, we couldn't have a better partner in the Federal Reserve on that initiative as well. And so special thanks to the Federal Reserve for caring so much about economic opportunity. Also, as I do every time we meet, we ask you to give us input into your outlook on several issues. And what has become custom here at the Florida Chamber is to give you feedback, to be a mirror, if you will, of letting you know what you told us. And so I'm going to quickly share back to you what you told us. So as we transition into phase 2, and I'm going to read these because I know not all of you are able to see the video today. So as we transition into phase 2 of the governor's step-by-step order, which statement best describes how you believe Florida is doing relative to other states? 62% of you think Florida is doing better than other states. About just under a third of you, 30%, say that we're doing about the same or comparable. Only 2% of those of you who participated think that we're doing worse than other states, and only 6% are unsure. So 92% of our members have said that we're either doing better than other states or the same as other states. I think we're doing better than most other states, and certainly than most other countries. How do you feel your community has handled the phase-in process that Governor DeSantis has put out? And again, only 1% of you have said that your community is doing a poor job. And again, I want to give special thanks to local chambers of commerce all over Florida. We've been working together in unison on our Relaunch Florida platform, and many of you have literally adopted the Florida Chambers framework, and I truly believe it's one reason that Florida is doing better than most states and most countries. So thanks again. How concerned are you about a second wave? Again, most of you are concerned. About 25% of you, or almost a quarter of you, are very concerned. About almost half of you are concerned. Only 5% of you are not concerned. You might be the 5% that has already contracted COVID. I'm not sure yet, but I don't know whether it's a second wave or not. But obviously, we're seeing numbers go up all over the country, and so it's something we're going to pay a lot of attention to. How would you rate your community's response to the coronavirus? Again, I think most of you are happy with what your local community response has been. And again, not only big thanks to Governor DeSantis and Surgeon General Rifkes, but special thanks to local chambers throughout Florida who've really found a way to unify around what we're working on. On a personal level, how are you feeling about attending group meetings and events with at least 50 people? So less than a third of you said you're comfortable being in groups, of 50 or more. And so this obviously has big implications for business, because a lot of business is done at board meetings, at summits, at events. And so this is something we're going to continue to monitor. Also want to give shout out, I know I've mentioned leading local chambers of commerce here, but we started a couple of months ago together with many local chambers of commerce, Katie Wortherington and others, #ChamberStrong. And I wanted to give a snapshot here. We have over 50 leading local chambers of commerce in Florida that are not only using our Relaunch Florida language and framework, but also using the FloridaScorecard.org. We have developed, Dr. Jerry Parrish and his team developed a county-level COVID tracker, where every day you literally can go to the FloridaScorecard.org. You can go up here to the county data. You can find all 67 counties, and you can see what's going on locally, so you can know what to do with your healthcare professionals locally in terms of safely reopening. And I believe Dr. Parrish is actually going to show you an example of a local chamber, what that looks like later. If you are a member of the Chamber of Commerce and you want to know if your community is using the local scorecard, by all means, just follow up with us after this program or ask about it in the Q&A chat, Q&A feature, and we'll certainly do our best to address that today. Wanted to just give a quick shout out. The Florida Chamber Foundation's trustees a couple of years ago, together with former Speaker of the House Will Weatherford and I, created really the first in the nation statewide prosperity initiative. And when we started looking at the 2030 blueprint data, when we started looking at how many people are in Florida that live in poverty, especially how many children live in poverty, we simply had to do something about it. And so I think it's been a few years since our former chairman, Vern Buchanan, invited me to come up and testify in Congress on this issue. But ever since then, we've created the nation's largest state-level business-led prosperity initiative, and it is all focused on zip code level economic equality for everybody, regardless of where they were born, regardless of race, regardless of background, regardless of disability, regardless of ability. And couldn't be more excited to share with you in the coming weeks some new tools that have just come online that are going to help businesses all over Florida make a major difference on social justice and championing equality of opportunity locally. And again, we don't have a lot of time today to show you how it all works, but we have 67 counties in Florida, and we have 983 zip codes. There's about 871,000 children in our state who live in poverty. Now, this is a pre-COVID number. I want everybody to know that, so that number is certainly higher now. At least on a temporary basis. But as we travel the state or travel the nation, a lot of people don't believe that there's much poverty in their own backyard. And so what we've discovered is, we can actually look at poverty at a zip code level. And so we don't have a lot of time to do that today, but I've put here on the screen how you can contact our full-time executive director, Michael Williams. If your company has an interest in adopting a zip code, we need you. And special thanks to people like Farouk Husseini and the Huizingas and Florida Blue for adopting several zip codes. Thank you to Jim Murdahl here in Tallahassee for Tallahassee Community College adopting 32304. Special thanks to the Broward Alliance for creating, we have a statewide program called the Florida Prosperity Initiative, and we're starting to see counties like Broward create Broward Prosperity. And this is all part of a big movement to significantly root out poverty at the zip code level. Special thanks, we have one of our board members, Karen Moore, right here in Tallahassee. Their company committed to provide 20,000 meals just in one zip code alone as part of the 32304 effort. And so huge opportunity, and I appreciate Will Weatherford and Tom Sedema and all of the leaders that we have that are a big part of this. Farouk Husseini has been a real champion. And so if you haven't heard of this program, I hope today you will write down Michael's email, and I hope today you'll reach out to us and figure out how you can serve on the board or how you can adopt a zip code. And we certainly look forward to showing you how to look up your own zip code and figure out how many kids are in poverty, and then what can your company do, or what can you do as an individual to help unite around the right outcome. So excited about that program, excited about your involvement in it. So in terms of our task force that we created a couple of months ago, it's called Relaunch Florida Task Force. 95% of local chambers of commerce in Florida are participating in this. And again, I can't say enough. If you're not a member of your local chamber of commerce, I hope you'll fix that, because many local chamber partners have been providing real leadership, as have many of our economic development organizations. The Florida Economic Development Council is a big partner of ours here at the Florida Chamber. And between the economic development leaders and local chamber leaders, I think it's the secret sauce that's really making a big difference in Florida. Again, the strategy here has been from day one, our belief is if the business community stays united, there's nothing that we can't do. It's, if you want legal reform passed, then stop funding candidates that support the trial lawyers. And if the business community ever unified around that, we could make real progress. The same is true with COVID. And if we can all unite around what the CDC and the White House has put forward as a platform, which is aligned very closely with what Governor DeSantis is doing, and again, 412 cities, 67 counties, working through the local business community, we have a real fighting chance to keep everybody aligned and to continue to have Florida moving in the right direction. Again, we were the first to show you the White House gating criteria. I think it was about 2 months ago that we had a webinar where we showed you what this looked like. I think we shared it with you before groups like the Washington Post shared it, and so I was really glad to be able to do that. One of the things that the White House says is that there are 3 phases, and in order to go from one phase to the next, you have to meet certain what they call gating criteria, and they're all healthcare data. Florida has just moved into what's called phase 2. And I'm not going to read all of this. This will be available to send out to everybody later on. But other than our 3 southeast Florida counties, all of Florida, 64 counties, have moved in to phase 2. And we're getting reports left and right that that businesses are not only reopening, but they're safely adhering to CDC guidelines. And I think that's going to be the key to make sure we don't end up like Singapore and some other countries. In terms of phase 3, we're not there yet. No one really knows when we're going to get there. It's really going to be decided by how well all of you can help your communities adhere to the CDC guidelines. But when we get to phase 3, this is what it might look like. Some people think it might be June. Some people think it might be September. I'm not ready to go on record as to say when I think it might be, but nevertheless, this is what it'll look like once we finally get there. And so in order to get to phase 3, this is what has to happen. We have to go through a couple-week period of time where numbers are going down or certainly not going up. And so we're paying very close attention to the data that DOH puts out every single day. Now what I want to do is I want to provide you some federal updates as well as some state updates. And as I go through this, I want to be very clear that there's been probably 10 years of legislation passed in the last 3 months in terms of volume and in terms of complexity. And so what I want to do is give you a high level here, and I mean to do this so that then we can have follow-up conversations later. A lot of times what the answer is for a retailer could be different for a manufacturer, could be different for someone in the service industry. And so we'll do our best to quickly walk through this. First of all, if you're trying to run your business and you're trying to keep your employees and your customers and your family safe, you probably know that Congress has been doing an awful lot over the last couple of months. And all I simply wanted to show you here is that if you look at phase 1, 2, and 3, there's been 3, what I would call major efforts that Congress took. You've heard words like CARES Act and PPP and so forth. And then they did 2 sort of supplemental actions, if you will, to go back and really expand what happened in the first 3 phases to maybe more businesses, to additional businesses, and then also to clarify a couple of things as well. And so I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So as I mentioned, some of this is about adding flexibility to the PPP program. And so again, I'm not going to read through all of this right now, but what this was meant to do is to provide significant flexibility to extend the time periods that businesses have, but also to extend the flexibility of who can participate and for how long. And again, if you think about it, Congress made an emergency decision to do this in the first place. And as soon as they did, the business community did what we always do, which is we said, hey, That was great, but we have some questions, or, we have some additional guidance that we would like. And so in many ways, Congress went back and has clarified a lot of their intent, and I think in almost every way made the right decisions in terms of flexibility and expansion of these programs. And then also, again, I know I gave a shout out to the Federal Reserve earlier today, but the Main Street Lending Program was expanded. It was originally designed for larger companies that were not originally eligible in the first round. And then what's happened is, thanks to the Federal Reserve, they thought it was important that small and mid-sized businesses have access to this as well. And so you can see the loan sizes have been changed. The term of the loans are different, or different options anyway, and you can even delay the payment of the principal. And so I say that just to say, there's a lot that people wish Congress would do that they haven't done yet. For example, including local chambers of commerce in who's eligible for these loans. There's a lot left to do on child care. It's been estimated that about 50% of America's child care facilities are still closed, and some of them are not going to make it without some assistance. And so we've tried to be a real champion together with the National Chamber there, and I'll show you more about that in just a second. In terms of sort of by the numbers, if you will, these are the Florida numbers so that you can get your arms around it. And again, if you just look at the PPP loans, we've had over 350,000 loans, over $30 billion, and these are all Florida numbers. And so a lot going on here, and Florida is very high in the ranking, top 3 in most every category. Wanted to give a special shout out to our government relations team here. Picked up very early from the members of the Florida Chamber a significant concern on frivolous lawsuits as a result of COVID. And early on, all the way back in April, we were sending letters to the U.S. Senate President McConnell or to the Majority Leader, and also we had local chamber leaders all over Florida helping us with sign-on letters. We have over 50 local chambers right now that have joined us in asking for congressional relief when it comes to COVID-19 lawsuits. And so we're going to stay on this. I'm often asked if the Florida legislature is going to go back into a special session to deal with this. We've been in constant contact with leadership in the legislature. And again, the budget year for Florida ends June 30th, so it's very, very unlikely there's going to be a special session in the next 2 weeks. Beyond that, I think a special session would really have to be determined by what Congress does. If Congress passes another round of stimulus and they put rules and regulations around it in such that the legislature in Florida would have to meet again in order to accept those funds or accept those dollars, or make regulatory changes, then that, in my opinion, is how we might see a special session. But absent one, it's sort of a jump ball. Also, I mentioned child care and child care facilities, and the fact that it's estimated that about half of child care facilities in America are closed. And again, with over 1 million people in Florida who lost their jobs, as we try to get people back to work again, it's going to be very difficult to do that if child care is not available. And so we have also been part of a huge national movement to ask Congress to take action to provide some assistance and relief for quality child care facilities across our country. Now, switching over to what's going on in Florida, there's just as much happening in Florida, if not more, than is happening in Congress. One of the things I wanted to highlight here is, even though we're all focused on COVID, the reality of it is it's an election year. In fact, qualifying for the House and Senate ended at noon today, so our team's been poring over all of that. But I just simply wanted to give you a quick snapshot here. We just got the brand new numbers in from April, and if you look at this through April, Democrats lead voter registration in Florida by a pretty good margin, by about 275,000. So There's about 275,000 more Democrats in Florida than Republicans. And if you look at that yellow part of the pie, about 27% of all registered voters are no party affiliate. And what's interesting, if you look at the April numbers, you'll see that about 42% of all new voter registrations are no party affiliate. And if you look back over the last couple of years, that's been very consistent. Some months there's more Democrats than Republicans, and some months more Republicans than Democrats. But sometime around 2025, if all of these trends hold true, Florida would be Democrat, then NPA, then Republican. And so we have 4 members in our political team, and they study this on a regular basis. So we'll be in touch on that every month. And then also, I just wanted to give voice. I mentioned that Florida is the most important state in the country when it comes to the White House and the future of the free world. But one thing that most people haven't talked about yet is we have 5 proposed constitutional amendments that'll be on the ballot this fall. We could be the first state in America to mandate $15 an hour minimum wage. That'll be Amendment 2 this fall. And again, I didn't put these here to go through them in detail. I put them here to simply say there will be 5 amendments on the ballot. If your company hasn't started paying attention to this yet, the Florida Chamber would be more than happy to jump on a phone call and talk to your team about, what are the impacts of all of these. I'd want to point out 4 of these, Amendments 1 through 4, either billionaires or special interest groups paid to put these on the ballot. Florida is one of the only states where you can essentially write a big check and pay for signatures to get on the ballot. And then only 1 of these was put there by the legislature. So that's important to know. And then also, if you've been on any of our webinars for the last 5 years, you know that rural economic development is one of the most important efforts that we all can unify behind. With 67 counties, we have much of our population and many of our companies in Florida that are operating in a rural environment. Through the CARES Act that Congress passed, they set aside a significant amount of the Treasury to go to smaller counties with populations under 500,000. And just last week, I believe it was, earlier this week, Governor DeSantis unveiled a plan to go ahead and disperse $1.2 billion of the CARES Act dollars to small counties who are mostly rural. But this is a big shot in the arm. We're trying to double the GDP in Florida over the next 10 years that comes from rural counties. And so, we, again, really appreciate Governor DeSantis for going ahead and making this decision. Very much looking forward to seeing the impacts. Another call that we're getting right now on a very regular basis has to do with unemployment compensation. And I wanted to show you a couple of slides on this, actually. 2 things to need to know here is that we have invested in Florida out of our unemployment trust fund about $1.4 billion. There was $4 billion in the fund before COVID happened. And so there's some dollars left in there, but keep in mind this can get depleted pretty quickly. It has been depleted in the past. And if it gets depleted again, you all know what happens. The fund turns to the business community, and oftentimes we would see an unemployment insurance increase to be able to fund that again. We're hoping that doesn't happen, and if it did, we would be advocating for some other options than to put this on the backs of the business community. As we approach the end of September, we're going to be looking at, decisions will be made to see what will the rates look like next year and what will the length of the benefits be as well. And so just wanted to let everybody know that, no matter what's happening in the short term, that there's a trigger point here as we get to the end of September in terms of next year's decisions. And so we'll keep everybody posted on that. Here is a really interesting way to look at this, okay? So everyone knows that Congress thought it was a good idea to add on an additional $600 a week for people who lost their job due to COVID. And that, of course, runs through July 31, at least for the moment. Who knows, that could get extended, you never know. But if you look sort of to the left to right here, Here's kind of how it worked. We've been getting calls from media from all over the country asking us, what we think about the length of the unemployment system in Florida. And I want to show you how someone who lost their job from COVID, who continues to be unemployed under the current environment, would actually earn unemployment all the way up through Christmas of this year. So the state reemployment assistance lasts for 12 weeks. And if you expend that, then you go right into what's next, which is the pandemic emergency unemployment comp. That is up to an additional 13 weeks. And if you go through that, then there's the pandemic unemployment assistance that can go up to, I believe, another 14 weeks or so. That takes you all the way through Christmas. And so these are meant to sort of stack on top of each other. When one runs out, the next one kicks in. And again, that $600 runs through July 31. I know many of you right now are thinking, what do? I have employees who say they don't want to come back to work for me because they're earning more on unemployment than they would if they came back to work for me. A couple of things that I want to say about that. Number one, it is a real national crisis. I think it's an unintended consequence of what Congress did. There's I believe it's a University of Chicago report out that says that 2/3 of people who are on unemployment who are receiving this assistance do in fact make more on unemployment than they made when they were actually working. That's a big problem. But what I would want you to know, we've been working closely with with DEO here in Florida and the unemployment insurance folks. And two things I would want you to know. Number one, if you've received PPP funding, you are required to report those people to DEO. And so that's a requirement that you have. Also, whether you've received it or not, you can report able-bodied employees who are simply deciding not to come back to work because they can make more money on unemployment. That would be called fraud, and that's not supposed to be allowed. In our post-webinar email today, I will send you the phone number and web address that you can visit if you know of anybody that's in that situation. Again, a lot of this was set up on the honor system, and unfortunately, a lot of people are trying to take advantage of it. It's not supposed to be happening, and we do want to provide you some tools and resources on know what you can do about that. In terms, so I'm going to flip from unemployment insurance now to workers' comp, and this is a great big unknown right now. We know of about 3,800 COVID-related claims. Most all of them are in healthcare or what we would call first responder situations. There's really no clear guidance on this. I would expect to see, a significant increase. I don't know if it'll be an explosion or not, but a significant increase in these cases as we go forward. And again, uncharted territory here. No one really knows what's going to happen with this. We have seen some other states go forward with a narrative that if you get COVID, there's actually an assumption that you must have contracted it at work. That seems a little insane to me, but nevertheless, just know that there are some states that have made that assumption that if you get COVID, you must have contracted it at work. And in those states, you can imagine what would be happening with workers' comp claims when the assumption is your employer was at fault from day one. That's not what we believe, and certainly something we would fight, but Carolyn Johnson and the team are on that one. And then also, I'm going to give it over to Dr. Parrish here in just a few minutes, but some other big news since we met last. Governor DeSantis, as well as Commissioner Richard Corcoran, have announced a plan to reopen our schools throughout the summer and fall. Today's webinar, we don't have time today to get into all of the details, but what I'm very impressed with and what I've looked at so far and in talking with some of our officials is, we acknowledge that the end of the current school year that we just finished, rather, it didn't end with all of the end-of-year exams, and, we weren't able to button everything up the way that we would want to. So when you reopen, it's not only a safety challenge, it's also how do we provide every child in Florida with the support and the training and the education that they're going to need. And so the reopening plan that we can send to you if you'd like to read it in detail, the reopening plan, I think it's phased in, it puts safety first, but I'm very impressed with what Richard Corcoran and the team at the Department of Education have figured out in terms of customizing the plan to what children need. Also, I really want to thank Chancellor Mack. This is just sort of a big picture of higher education, if you will, institutes for higher education. And again, there's a phased-in approach here, and it is all predicated on what I just said about, everyone sort of left the school year, perhaps at a different place. But we have former chairman of our board, Sid Kitson, is also the chair of the State Board of Governors for the university system, and our former chairman of our board, Marshall Kreiser, who used to be the president of AT&T Florida, is now the chancellor of the state university system. So whether it's Chancellor Mack or Kreiser or any number of our higher education leaders in Florida, whether it's an ICUF school or whether it's a state college or whether it's one of our public universities, we're all in this together, and we're looking forward to getting everybody back to school safely. Keep in mind, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that for the third year in a row, Florida's colleges and universities were rated #1 in the United States. We have the #1 college and university system in the United States, and that was pre-COVID, and I'm quite confident the rest of the nation's going to be looking at how Florida reopens its colleges and universities. I know I certainly would be looking to the #1 system in the United States and wondering how they're going to do it. So again, I've told you all for 3 months now, I think the world's watching Florida and the nation's certainly watching Florida, and this is another example. So Chancellor Mack and the team, congratulations, very much proud of the work that you've done. All right. With that said now, my favorite part of the program is to hear what our chief economist, Dr. Jerry Parrish, has come up with. And so what we're going to do here is I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Parrish. He's going to give his presentation, and then right after that, I can see we're starting to get questions in the Q&A function. And so as soon as Dr. Parrish finishes, then we're going to go straight to your questions today. So thanks very much. Dr. Parrish?
Thanks, Mark. Always good to see everybody on the call today. I want to show you a few slides and talk about some of the questions that I've been getting, and that may or may not answer some of the questions that you guys want to send in. But let's go to the slides, and we'll go ahead and start showing those. First of all, just the Florida scorecard. You can see anytime, 24 hours a day, the most recent data that's up. COVID-19 tiles on the top show you that Florida is in its 101st day as far as the tiles. And you can see the number of unemployed. If you're not used to using it, I would appreciate if you do. Certainly, Mark's talking about more than 50 local chambers are now using the scorecard. We've given them the code to embed their county's COVID-19 tiles in here. You see a really nice example of how Winter Haven Chamber of Commerce has put our scorecard tiles on their website. When you click on these, no matter where you are, it takes you to the Florida scorecard, and same functionality. You can download the chart, you can download the raw data, and make your own chart if you like on these. And it's been really good. The amount of people that have been using it. Here's another example. Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce is also using these slides, and we've gotten a lot of comments, a lot of appreciation for doing this. And certainly, if I hope your local chamber are using these. If you're a local chamber, please contact me. Any of you can contact me to get the code to embed these on the scorecard. If you're getting the emails every morning we send out at the chamber, if you're not, you can find them at floridachamber.com/coronavirus and sign up. You've started getting these emails over the past 3 or 4 weeks. We've gone from putting the cumulative number of cases to the 14-day average. So these are average daily increase. You also have all the numbers. You might notice we're now over 1.3 million people tested. And I want to talk a little about that. Really one of the most important numbers you have to think about, and it's on the scorecard at the state level and at the county level, is the percent of cases that are positive. Now on this you see 5.3%. I want to be really clear, that's from day one, back when, even 10 or 11% on average of the cases were testing positive. That has continued to come down over time. And I wanted to show you that today because we've had a lot of people talking about the big spike and the surge and all those things in Florida. You have to remember that we do have a big surge in testing, and so we're picking up more positive cases. But what you can see here is the percentage of positive that's happened since early March. You're talking about from March 20th all the way around April. We peaked out a couple times at 11.0%. We did hit 5.2% a few days ago, and we're back up to 5.3. I think that's just kind of a flattening out of the curve that we're staying here. So some people have gotten alarmed about the big number. I'm not concerned about the big number, but I also want to be real clear that this stuff is dangerous, and it is something that we need to continue to do our social distancing. But certainly it looks like certainly some of the other states are in a lot worse shape than Florida is. I'll talk more about that in a minute. One of the things I did this week that was fun is yesterday morning I got to speak on the Enterprise Florida Board of Directors meeting. And I want to show you a couple of slides that I showed them because they've got some new board members that may not have been around when the Florida Chamber Foundation was active way long ago. So I showed them this slide. More than 50 years of securing Florida's future at the Florida Chamber Foundation. And I pulled out one of the old reports from the very early 1990s called Enterprise Florida. And I hope most of you, if not all of you, know that this organization, the Florida Chamber Foundation, was the first to, put out a report that talked about creating a public-private partnership to do economic development in this state. And there have been many other reports. Groups like Career Source Florida have come out of some of these reports. So proud to be working with an organization that has this much history. And certainly we're getting a lot more attention now for Florida 2030 and our Florida 2030 blueprint, because people are asking us, hey, are we going to be able to hit our goals? And certainly we're determined to do that. Another thing I showed the Enterprise Florida Board was this. This is updated from yesterday when I showed them, so updated numbers. These are the current numbers of Florida. 69,000 cases, a little over 11,000 people hospitalized, 2,848 deaths. How do we compare against maybe some of the states that you've seen on the news lately? So we all know what's been going on in New York State. So just to kind of give you a comparison of how Florida is doing compared to New York, I decided to put up the current New York numbers, the best I could find. Positive cases, 380,000. You can see multiples, and I want to be clear about what the multiples are here. As far as the number of cases, you got to remember, Florida does have a little bit higher population than New York. We're the third most populous state. They're the fourth now. So 5.5 times as many cases in New York with less people. 7.8 times as many people hospitalized in New York as Florida, and 8.5 times as many deaths. So when I get the questions about, hey, how's Florida doing? Are you going to be okay? You have to remember certainly Florida's in a substantially better position. We're here in states that are about to run out of hospital capacity like Arizona and things like that. That's just not happening in Florida. Once again, this is a very serious thing, but let's put it all into perspective here and really see where we are. And I've gotten some other information I want to show you about the disease. I really want to talk about the economy, but I think this is important as a reminder. When you think about any individual's risk of going out and going to a meeting, think about the Florida population. This is the percentage of population that shows in these age groups listed across the bottom. You can see, 5 to 12, 13%, depending on the age category. I'm going to turn this into an area map so I can show stuff. This is the same exact info. I'm just going to use this as a background now to show you some of the other info. So same exact info, just the distribution of population by age here. Let's take a look and see what the number of cases, where they fall. You can see that the number of positive cases are certainly substantially more in the higher age range, and even since I showed this 2 or 3 weeks ago, even more in the 25 to 64 age range than the population. Now, what's interesting is I've just seen some antibody test info, and I want to give the disclaimer about this is new info. No, I'm not sure that anybody's really sure about the accuracy and everything of the antibody test, but I just wanted to show you in Florida there have been substantial number of antibody tests, and I just found this data. I wanted to show it to you because it's pretty interesting. When you look at the people who have tested positive for the antibody compared to the number of cases, what it looks like here is that, yeah, we've had substantially younger people getting this disease that never have gone to get tests, never got a positive COVID-19 test, but they have been tested positive for the antibody. So the disclaimer of how accurate these are, I have no idea. Not a medical doctor. I don't work in a lab. So I'm not 100% sure about that. But what I thought was fascinating about this is that, certainly we've heard the stories in other states where it looks like substantially more people than we even know about had asymptomatic cases. Certainly it looks like here it's happening in our younger population. Now I want to show you the standard look at this as well. Population, hospitalization, and deaths. Same thing. Here's your age group, turned it into an area. I'm going to stack on top the hospitalizations here by age group, and you can see that certainly the age profile shifts to the right, where older people are in most cases the ones being hospitalized. I'm going to put deaths on here, and I want to give you a sense of scale by putting the numbers in. When you stack these numbers on top of each other, you can see, for example, in age 65 to 74, they account for 10% of the population, or 10% of the cases, and 21.3% of the hospitalizations and 22% of the deaths. That's the way to read this chart. So what we're still seeing is certainly skewed by area, by age group. And I think one of the important things to look at is I looked up the number of deaths, where they came from. Actually, less than 1% came from correctional facilities at 0.6%, but 48% of all the deaths in Florida that are attributed to COVID-19 have come from assisted living facilities, nursing homes, that kind of group. So you can see certainly in Florida's death rate, death numbers keep going up just like every state. But to give you a bit of perspective here, think about if you're 45 to 54 and healthy, your probability of death is pretty low compared to your percentage in the population, your percentage of even getting the disease, and certainly that progresses by age. Now, what's all this doing to the economy? We know what's happened to the U.S. job market. From March to April, we lost 22.1 million jobs. And I want to show you that and show you what Florida's looked like. This data's been available. I've shown some of you this already. All industries, we lost 11.3% of jobs during that month of April. But, this is April to April. So a year ago, that keeps us from having to seasonally adjust these numbers. So we lost them over 1 million jobs. You see the categories they came in. We lost 41.5% of our leisure and hospitality jobs, over 500,000 during this time period. Now, we're still waiting on the May job numbers, and we'll get those a week from today. They'll come out on the 19th. You can watch Florida by the numbers. I'll show you what the newest updated numbers are. And what you may have heard of from the U.S. job report, which is already out, that we had a record increase in job creation, from one month to the next. Well, that's true. It certainly was a big number. But I want to put that into perspective as well. After losing more than 20 million jobs, we increased month to month for 2.5 million jobs. What's that going to mean for Florida? Certainly, we're going to get more jobs back. But you got to keep in mind that when we get those June numbers, or the numbers on June the 19th, those are actually from May. So what's actually happened since, you'll see the May numbers, and that's typically, a look from about the middle of the month. What you'll see is by the time we get the June numbers, a whole lot of people will have gone back to work. It's not going to be 100% of them, I will guarantee you that. However, it looks like, and I think the financial markets up until a couple of days ago really thought that we'd turned the corner, we'd hit bottom on those. And I certainly believe we have. Now, overall, what's the future of the economy going to look like? I've showed this slide before, kind of putting the growth rate, the expected 2020 GDP estimate into perspective. People have asked me, is it going to be as big as the Great Depression? No. Is it going to be big or bigger than the Great Recession? And the answer is yes, highly likely to do that. Certainly for a shorter period of time, you would hope. The forecast for the second quarter are just, minus 40% for a quarter and minus 52%. I saw one of them. But overall, when you look and put all the forecast into a barrel and you take out the really, crazy high and crazy low ones and get where the bulk of the forecasts show is our GDP rate will be down, somewhere between 2 and 8%. 2% would imply a very quick V return. Not expecting that to happen. But where we are, the Wall Street Journal interviews a lot of economists. They have a consensus forecast they come out with. Minus 5.5% was the last one they saw. The Federal Reserve just came out at minus 6% for 2020. So not as low as the lowest of the estimate. But I want to tell you, in a $1.11 trillion economy, 6% is more than $60 billion of GDP loss. Now, how much is that? It's kind of hard to put a sense of scale on it. But I'm going to tell you it's more than 7 U.S. states' individual GDP is what we're talking about. So it is a big deal. And you might expect some small states like Vermont will be in there, some states like South Dakota that don't have a lot of people. But you've got some big states in there as well. North Dakota is a big oil producer. Montana's in there. There's several states in there that you would think, wow, that's a big deal. The one that's the biggest deal that this is bigger than is the entire GDP of the state of Alaska is about $55 billion. And you know what a big oil producer they are, big tourism economy as well. So yes, this one's going to hurt. There's no doubt about it. We're going to have to work together to relaunch the Florida economy, and certainly it's not going to come back overnight. But we'll be watching it here for you, and glad to give you this info. If you ever have any questions, please contact me up here at the Florida Chamber Foundation. I'm back in the office seemingly every day, and I'll be glad to answer those questions that you have and the ones we have today. But now I'll turn it back over to Mark. Mark, take it back. Thanks a lot.
All right. Dr. Parrish, thanks very much for that. I learned a lot from you just now, to be candid. So what I wanted to do is we have now what we want to do is we want to move into the open Q&A portion. We do have a number of questions that have already come in. And again, I'm going to take them in the order they came in. Also, I mentioned earlier the litigation initiative that we have to try to protect all Florida companies from frivolous lawsuits relative to COVID. And what we really have is a two-pronged effort. In terms of our federal effort, we have united much of Florida's business community to try to get our congressional delegation to be on board with protecting local businesses in Florida. So there's that sign-on letter that I mentioned earlier. I did have a question that came to me about, is there still time for your local or regional chamber to sign on to that sign-on letter? The answer is yes. So if you have an interest in your chamber participating in our statewide effort on that, if they aren't already doing that, just simply give us an email or a call, and we're already working closely with over 200 of the leading chambers in Florida, so we'll be happy to connect together if that's something that you'd like to do. Also, there was a question on the unemployment side. If you have received PPP funding, I mentioned that you're required to report certain individuals, and I want to clarify the point there. The only people that you're required to report if you've received PPP funding are those that are not returning to work in favor of telling you that they want to continue to earn more on unemployment than they would if they return. So those are the ones that you're required to report. I wanted to clarify that, so thank you for that. All right, a couple of questions that have come in. I'll just take them in the order that they came in. And Dr. Parrish, feel free to jump in here as well. So this question says cases of COVID-19 are going up in Florida and nationwide as well. There's a lot of discussion about why and whether to be concerned about it. What do you think about the daily record-breaking number of cases in Florida? So for everyone's benefit, the number that I put out this morning in our daily email that we send out during the week to give you an update, we did clarify, the number of new cases yesterday was in fact a record in Florida, over 1,600 new cases. We've been doing quite a bit of investigation over the last week or so about the numbers, and there's two things I would add here. In addition to, we should all be concerned about a global pandemic that does not have a vaccine, right? It's incredibly contagious. There's still a lot we don't know about it. And as I've said now for the last 102 days, much of the tale of how this goes is going to be up to the business community and what we do to provide a safe environment for our employees and certainly for our customers. But in terms of are we concerned about this, of course, I think all Americans should be concerned about this. But, a couple things I would point out. Governor DeSantis over a month ago committed to a monster increase, those are my words, not his, in the number of tests that we were going to do in Florida. So now we're well over 1 million people or 1 million tests that have been performed, and it's been a couple 100,000, I think, just in the last 10 days or so alone. And so, it begins to be an algebra equation on one hand. So the more people we test, you would think the more people we would find to be positive, which is why Dr. Parrish is exactly right. The decline in the total number or percentage of positive cases since day one is a really, really important metric to look at. But what I would also tell you in talking to many officials lately, the reason that we've so dramatically increased testing isn't just to get a number, but it's so that Governor DeSantis and the Department of Health and others at DEM and elsewhere can actually put the right script together of what to do about what the data says. And so there's been a focus on not only increased tests, but increased testing in the areas of Florida where it's suspected that you would, maybe have an increase. So, for example, I think Florida's writing the book on assisted living facilities and nursing homes and what's going on there and how to do testing. Also in farm communities, there's a significant increase in the testing that's going on. So I think it's very important for all of us to know, we would expect cases to continue to increase just as they are globally. But as Florida gets smarter about, what to do, we're also getting smarter about where to test. If someone wanted to, just drive down the testing numbers, then, go test parts of Florida that haven't seen very much COVID spread. And so I'm actually proud of our Department of Health leaders that we're not only increasing testing, but we're going into where we think most of the testing needs to be done. So I would expect the numbers to continue to trend the way that they are, and then I would expect our state and especially local healthcare leaders, to be able to react and get ahead of that. That's the whole reason to do testing in the first place. And again, until there's a vaccine for this, which, is certainly not anytime in the next couple of months, I think we should expect to kind of try to strike that balance. A next question that came in had to do with what I said earlier about PPP funding. And, many companies are not eligible for PPP funding, including those of us that are designated as 501c6 entities. I mentioned earlier on the call, that we've been part of a big national group to try to get chambers of commerce eligible for this. And the question that came in is, do we see a way if chambers are eligible, what about other 501c6s? It's my opinion that it would be all 501c6s. The Bankers Association, the Realtors, the retail associations, the home builders. I think it would be all nonprofits that are designated by the IRS as 501c6 organizations. And so I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. Here's another question in here that's really about employers. This is from an employee's perspective, I believe. It says, what if the employer is not adhering to guidelines set forth by the CDC or the state and are therefore putting employees at unnecessary risk? What would employees do? So this is an interesting question. The Florida Chamber has the Florida Chamber Safety Council, and a couple of months ago during the initial COVID environment, we actually did a statewide training program for safety officers and HR managers, and we had one of the leaders from OSHA on the line. So OSHA is oftentimes, where that would get reported to, but what was interesting is I personally asked the OSHA instructor, what would a company do if a city said one thing, a county said another, the state said something, and then CDC or OSHA or EPA said something different? Because back then, we were just literally seeing guidelines and no one really knew if they were going to be consistent or not. The answer that was given by OSHA was that they really had no idea how a business would adhere to that or how they would treat it. But what I will offer that I think is really important for everyone to know is that the folks at OSHA were very, very helpful in terms of saying, look, this is an unprecedented situation. Nobody's ever had to deal with this before. And what they're going to look at is, was the employer making every attempt that they could to protect the employees? And, did they provide masks? Did they do temperature checks? Did they provide, all of the right disinfectants and so forth? I think for employers that aren't doing those basic things, I don't really know how that would play out. But the best answer I can give you here is we have very clear guidelines about, 6 feet of separation so far. And I know there's discussion of, are you better off at 2 feet or 3 feet with a mask on than 6 feet without one? Hopefully we'll get some guidance on that. But hopefully that answers that question. Jerry, you might know this. There's a question here that says, since increased testing has found more cases, are the contact tracers being deployed by state agencies, or are the contact tracers decided at the county health level? Every time I talk with the Surgeon General or every time I talk with the Department of Health, I think that the program is led at the state level, but at the county level is really where all of this comes to life. And so, Jerry, do you know more than that?
I don't.
Okay. Yeah. We've regularly been connected to directing everybody back to the local health department because, again, what happens in Live Oak is very different than what happens at South Beach. And we've been told the local health departments are really in charge of contact tracing at the local level. We will, Kevin, we will look that up and verify that, and if there's a different answer there, by all means, we'll put that out on our frequently asked questions page as well. Okay. So, Dr. Parrish, here is a question for you. This comes from one of Florida's leading economic developers, and I will not mention his name, but he said he thanks you for your leadership, first of all, and then he said, during this uncertain time, we often talk about how many people move to Florida every day. Is it still accurate to say we have about 1,000 to 1,200 people moving to Florida every day? Has that number increased, decreased, et cetera? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the latest number that we have, if you average over the past 2 or 3 years, has been 900 net new people a day. So yes, there's still more than 1,000 people moving to Florida every day, but we do have some leaving. We don't know why they're leaving, but they are, and we have some pretty good data on that. What's happening right now, I think it's certainly slowed down during this COVID-19 time frame because a lot of people move to Florida because there are open jobs. And we just saw the open jobs number come down. It's on the Florida scorecard. You know that there's not as many people hiring right now. So I do believe we're going to probably drop below that 900 net new people a day when we get the numbers for this time of the year. However, I think on average we're going to be back to that 900 net new people a day here pretty quickly.
Okay. A couple more questions. This one has to do with economic diversification. And so, Dr. Parrish, I'll go to you with this one as well. And I won't read the whole thing, but it says, knowing that economic diversification matters for economic growth and recovery, and knowing that educational diversification is necessary for economic diversification, what advice can you provide our state's colleges, either technical colleges or the college system and or universities, in terms of their workforce programs, both immediate and long-term? And Jerry, if you could, you do a lot of incredible work about measuring economic diversity in Florida, and most people that I talk to think that Florida's economy is not diverse, and we're one of the most diverse economies in the United States, and a lot of that has to do with all of the work that's been done over the last 20 years to try to diversify our economy and to make us have the top education system in the country. So any thoughts? I know you've actually talked quite a bit about, if we were to see a $15 an hour, state mandate on wages, that could really do a lot to dampen how many people end up going on for their certifications and technical degrees. So you mind kind of looping all that into one answer?
Sure. I learned a lot about this when we did our Florida Jobs 2030 report that we had produced a couple of years ago. That was an interesting report. It was great because we got some funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do that. And that's the report where we talked about those 5 target industries that we expect not only to grow in the future, but to provide a lot of opportunity for people with high school degrees, for certifications, for associate's degrees, for bachelor's degrees and higher. I think this is Florida's great opportunity now, because we know for example, our leisure and hospitality and our retail industries are going to be most likely the slowest to come back. There's great opportunity to take those folks and help them get retrained. Now, what can we do all as a group? What if we could, establish the fact that Florida was the absolute best place in America to get, to find trained manufacturing workers ready to go, ready to work? Well, we'd have companies moving here because that's exactly what they were looking for, is people that are ready to work and who have some training and are ready to go. I think that's a great opportunity for our state colleges around the state. We know that during times of economic uncertainty and during recession, that a lot of folks will actually start at a state college and before they go on to maybe a 4-year institution. And I think now's the time, if Florida really came out strong, signaled to the businesses in other states and other countries that we were going to be the leading producer of, educated workers in 2 or 3 or 5 of these fields that we've chosen. There would be no doubt that Florida would diversify its economy, and everybody would be looking to Florida as the model of how to do it.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Couple other questions here. One question that came in from Eileen, it says, do you have to show multiple symptoms to be tested? Because that's still being told by some of these testing sites. That is not the case. In fact, we know many people who have just literally walked right up to a walk-up testing site with no symptoms at all. I tell you what I'll commit to do here, Eileen. On our frequently asked questions site, what we can add is we can take your question and turn it into where to contact if in fact you're looking for a place to be tested, or if you're given that inaccurate information. The local health department's going to be the answer, but we've actually been getting that question a lot lately, and every time I call either the Surgeon General or the Department of Health, it's verified that no, you don't have to have symptoms, not 1, 2, or 3 symptoms. We want as many people as want to be tested. There's a lot of political questions in here relative to, what are our surveys saying on polling, and is COVID going to have an impact on the election? The answer is yes and yes and yes, and we'll talk a lot more about that on one of our future webinars that will probably have a standalone political webinar. I know that not everyone's interested in that, but Ken, for you and others that are as interested in it as I am, we'll dedicate some additional time to that soon, I promise. Let's see if I have any more.
There are.
Let's see. So there's a question in here about nursing homes. Any idea when nursing homes may be open for family and visitation? And look, I know this is just an incredibly important issue, and it is supposed to happen in phase 3. And so as I put the slide up earlier about what happens in phase 3, more regular visitation for assisted living facilities like nursing homes is supposed to happen in phase 3. Unfortunately, since phase 3 is predicated on healthcare data moving in the right direction over a couple-week period of time, we just have no idea when that's going to happen. I don't know whether that's weeks away or months away, unfortunately, but I know a lot of families are really struggling because of this, and so I hope it's soon. We just don't know. Jerry, do you see any other questions coming in here?
I do, Mark. I don't want to call them non-rule followers, but we had a couple of people type into the chat, and I'll be glad to answer those without, or at least read them out without calling your names. Here's one that says, going back to the testing ramp up, which I believe is giving us more realistic numbers, how are we as chambers and chamber leaders showcasing our local scientists and researchers right here at home in Florida as we work toward more efficacious, wow, big word, testing, a vaccine, and eventual herd immunity? Mark, you got any thoughts about that?
I don't. I actually, in talking with quite a few of our health professionals in Florida, I've been blown away at how much of this is actually happening here in Florida. And I know I know a couple of the tests are actually being piloted right here in Florida. So we can connect with our teammates at BioFlorida, and we can certainly pursue that. And maybe on our June 25th webinar. Look, we've been, one thing that it does remind me of, I'm really proud of our team for the last 100 days or so. Every business in Florida that's doing good things to help their community stay safe, we've been trying to highlight you in our morning email, and it would actually be a high honor to be able to honor our scientists and researchers that are right here in Florida who are trying to do this. And so we'll put some thought into that over the next couple of days. That's a really great question. And, if you think about it, as we try to diversify our economy, a big part of it is going to be, research and development and discovery and patents and turning that into more manufacturing and distribution right here in Florida. Those are two goals right out of our 2030 blueprint. So that makes a lot of sense.
All right, great answer. Here's one more. It says, what industry do you think will rebound the fastest with job creation? And what are the anticipated changes of new jobs for 2030? That's a great question. One of the things I showed you what the early results were as far as job creation and who hadn't been hurt as much, and certainly those are good candidates here. Construction, I talk a lot about the fact that we've actually accelerated some construction projects like road construction, I-4 Ultimate construction. I'm sure you folks in Orlando appreciate that. But manufacturing didn't get hurt too bad as well, and financial services didn't get hurt so badly. I think those are some of the prime candidates for that, especially manufacturing. I really believe that you're going to see a lot of people with big attempts to reshore manufacturing here to the state, so we're not dependent on other countries for medical supplies and pharmaceuticals and those kind of things. I think you're going to see that over the next couple of years. It takes a long time to change your supply chain. However, I do believe that now people will start getting serious about that. But one of the things that it looked like there were a lot of job losses that I don't think you're going to see in the May jobs report we'll get next Friday is one of the bigger categories of losing jobs was healthcare. And you think, how could that be with this, coronavirus? But remember, dentist office closed down, elective surgery closed down. There were a lot of people, physicians not going to work as well during that time. So, certainly they're going to be at near the top as far as the fastest return to normal when we start getting, job numbers here, not only next week, but then the following month as well, I think. That's a good question. Yeah,
it is, and it's you've been asked that a lot lately about what industries are we not talking about yet that that might come back faster and which ones might get hurt. And one that I fear was doing quite well before this that might even do better later is the personal injury trial lawyer business, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they don't have a record year in a good way. I had heard, we received over $5 billion in CARES Act funding from Congress, and I made a suggestion that we use that funding to tear down all the billboards in Florida that encourage people to sue local businesses. But I don't think we've started doing that yet, although I'd be in favor of that. We have, as you know, we have more billboards in Florida encouraging you to sue someone than any other state or country in the world. And it's going to hurt our recovery, and we've got to do everything we can to support the private sector as they reopen. All right, what I would like to do, I believe, actually I see one more question in here, and the question is regarding, is there a shortage on testing kits? We've asked a lot about this, and we don't believe that there's a shortage at the moment of testing kits. Two things I would add to this is I know that the state is actually considering expanding what we would call walk-up test facilities. I talked with a couple hundred local chambers of commerce this Tuesday about helping us find additional high-traffic areas where, it might be convenient for people in Florida to do more walk-up testing. And so if your business is maybe, fits that bill, or if you have a local chamber in a high-traffic area that you think would be a very convenient place in your community to do more walk-up testing, I can't make any promises, but I would certainly pass that along. I also want to give a big shout-out to the Department of Health. We have helped source and distribute, millions of masks at the Florida Chamber during this COVID situation, but the Department of Health has really come through lately. They've actually delivered several palletfuls of masks and the Florida Chamber's been distributing them to local chambers of commerce that are interested in being local distribution points for local doctor offices and healthcare facilities. And so no one would know that's happening. No one's looking for any credit on that, but I did want to give a special shout out to the team at the Department of Health for using sort of existing distribution or supply chain that exists from the Florida Chamber to local chambers. Let's see, I think that might be the last question.
There's more.
Oh, great. There's a couple more questions, and there's another one on nursing homes. And one thing I would want to add in here, remember the question was, when will nursing homes be open for family visitation? One thing I wanted to clarify is the White House has 3 phases, and in the White House's phase 3, that is when we would see more regular visitation to nursing homes. One thing that Governor DeSantis has done on occasion is to accelerate certain portions of phases and also decelerate others. And so it is technically possible that before Florida moved into, say, a full phase 3, that there could be, some kind of an addition to nursing home and assisted living facilities. It's also possible, I suppose, that, we could move into phase 3 and that full visitation could be delayed a little bit longer. There's really no telling. The good news is the White House has given every governor the flexibility to do what's best at the county level, at the regional level, at the state level. And so I would bet you lunch that, whatever the health data says in Florida is what Governor DeSantis and Surgeon General Rifkes are going to do, and I'm really proud of them for using that as their filter. What is the legislature's appetite for bringing QTI back in 2021, especially since the program pays for itself, as Dr. Perez has mentioned in the past? Look, I think there's many in the legislature, that I talk to that would love to bring targeted programs like QTI back in a big way. If I had it my way, we would have a personal income tax on trial lawyers and dedicate 100% of the funding to full-time funding for economic development for private sector job growth, and QTI would be one of the programs there. Look, it's too soon to tell what the set of legislative proposals are going to look like. We may have a special session if Congress does something that requires it, but we have a pretty landmark election season this year. And, you have, in the Senate anyway, you have 23 Republicans and 17 Democrats. And, oftentimes we're able to get Democrats and Republicans to agree on legislation. But oftentimes, our country's in such a partisan divide that even things that make as much sense as QTI can sometimes be divided along party lines. And so our first priority right now is to make sure we have the right people get elected this fall, people that support private sector economic development, as opposed to people who want to sue those of you who are growing the private sector. And so we're big supporters of this program, and Dr. Parrish is exactly right. If we want to diversify our economy more, it's a combination of talent and the right incentives, and taking Florida to one of the top 10 in the country from an economic diversification standpoint. Let's see. Question here has to do with contact tracing technology, I believe, and it says, I've heard that there are bracelets available that will warn when an individual gets too close to another human, or will provide tracking capabilities to be able to backtrack interaction should an individual test positive for COVID. Is this available in Florida yet? I have no doubt that technology exists. In fact, I think it was 2 months ago we shared on this very webinar 2 months ago what's happening in South Korea and what they're doing using phones and mapping technology. In those countries, your phone would get an alert when you were within 100 meters of someone that's tested positive of COVID. And also you could find out where masks were available and where testing locations are. So again, it doesn't surprise me that the technology is available. That's really amazing. From all that I've heard, I am not optimistic that there would be that level of tracking and tracing in Florida. I think the belief is that the Department of Health at the local level is doing a really good job of backtracking and tracing. But also, I've heard the White House is going to be weighing in on this in the coming weeks, and so anything's possible. But wow, if we can use innovation and technology to help keep everybody safe, that would make an awful lot of sense. And so we'll keep tracking on that. Let's see. There's a question here about which phase will larger events and venues be allowed. Look, we're wondering that same thing. Phase 3, the White House's phase 3 is when you would see the most relaxing of larger events and venues. We've been paying a lot of attention to what the CDC has been talking about on this, and also we've been paying a lot of attention to what hotels with large ballrooms are doing in response to it. And there's really no telling here, because I think what we're all in for is, until there's a vaccine, we're going to have a combination of safety precautions and a population that is going to grow weary of waiting around. And so I already know a lot of people, I'm sure all of you do too, that have said, I'm not waiting on a vaccine. I'm just going to go about my life, and if I get sick, I get sick. And so I think the longer this goes on without a vaccine, the more likely we are to see a bit of a rift between a focus on safety and a focus on getting back to normal. I think, so this is a good question, right, of when will larger events be allowed? That, at least if you look at the White House, that would be in phase 3. Governor DeSantis has already allowed larger events than we had in phase 1. But I think the real question isn't going to be when are these events allowed. The real question is, when will individuals decide to participate in these large events again? And I think for all of you who are nonprofits listening in today, some of you have annual meetings where it's your single largest fundraiser of the entire year. And, if you had an annual meeting in April where, that was half of your year's dollars and you had to cancel your meeting or reschedule it, your nonprofit may not survive 2020. And so, this is a real issue for small and mid-sized companies, especially those of you who are nonprofits who rely on events for a major source of your revenue. And we're aware of that. The Florida Chamber is sometimes in that same boat. We're trying to figure it out ourselves. And I'll tell you what's tricky here is, just because it's allowed doesn't mean, you're going to have an increase in participation or even the same numbers as before. So we're paying close attention to that. So in any event, every time I think we're out of questions, a couple more come in. So Dr. Parrish, do you see any more questions?
No more that I can see.
All right, so let's close that portion out. Again, I want to thank everybody very much for participating today, and I also want to again tell you that here in the next hour or so, we'll be sending out a follow-up from today's webinar with a recording, so that you can see all the slides and that you can see the questions as well or hear the questions. But please invite your entire team, invite your board to our very next webinar that we have for our membership and our trustees. Dr. Parrish and I will be joined by the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Dr. Raphael Bostic, and we're very much looking forward to that. So with that said, I want to thank you for being a member of the Florida Chamber. I want to thank you for being an investor in our foundation. We have a couple of board meetings next week, another statewide webinar with local chambers. Everybody have a safe weekend. We're all in this together. We're going to get through it together. Thanks so much.